Hi, my name is Haley, and this is Moon Brews. Hey, welcome to Moon Brews. Welcome back to Moon Brews if you're a returning listener. Today, I have a spooky-ass ghost story to tell you all. I saw a documentary on Netflix. We'll get into it. And I was like, I have to do more research for the podcast and tell you guys this insane ghost story. But speaking of spooky-ass ghost stories, I do want to have a Halloween special release near Halloween, a Halloween episode rather. And with that being said, I need your spooky-ass stories. So please send me your stories to moonbrewspodcast@gmail.com. We may read your spooky tale. I have 3 or 4 stories already that I have lined up. Send me more stories. I need to have all the ghouls and the goblins and all of the, dark, scary, spooky stuff in my life, and I want to record that for you. So please send me your stories. It's a requirement. I'm not asking, it's a requirement. So please go ahead and do that as soon as you possibly can so I can get on the mic again and record and give you those ghost stories near the time of Halloween and Samhain. So today's story is very spooky, very scary. It's a dark entity we're going to be talking about. So sage yourselves. Before, after, during, think about the white ribbon technique. A white ribbon is wrapping around you, protecting your spirit, your being, your body. It's a spooky one. So we'll have some ASMR here. I'm going to light my white tea candle. Hopefully you guys were able to hear that. We're going to light that one. And here we go. We're going to light this other one. I have 2 taller taper candles going right now, and use a white candle if you want protection. White candles can be used for honestly anything. White replaces any sort of color. So in cases like protection as well, you want white, light, purification, things like that. So light your candles, do your white ribbon technique, do a sage circle, protect yourself. We can have a little saying together. Honestly, nobody's allowed to come into our space. No one's allowed to infiltrate us. You have to keep your distance. You have to respect our space. We will respect you if you respect us. No entities, no spirits are allowed to attach. Please keep your distance and respect us. So without further ado, let's get into this spooky ghost story. So it's not one of my own, rather a story about an individual named Chris Di Cesare and his absolutely chilling experience with the paranormal. Chris's story is actually documented on a Netflix documentary called A True Haunting. I highly, highly recommend taking the time to watch this. It's eerie, it's haunting, it has a jump scare or two, but it covers Chris's story and the individuals that also were affected by it as well. I was able to come across this documentary because the moon had brewed it across my, for you or recommend it for you on my Netflix feed. So now it's my turn to haunt you with Chris's tale. So who is Chris Cesare? So today, Chris is an author, he's a social studies teacher, a public figure, and a speaker. But at the time of the story, Chris was a young man entering his sophomore year of college. He was attending SUNY Geneseo in New York, which is a liberal arts college in upstate New York. In the Netflix documentary, they made it known that SUNY Geneseo was a very hard school to get into, and even a harder school to maintain your academics once you were enrolled. It was extremely important to Chris to maintain his academic excellence, and this was because Chris was actually on an academic scholarship for cross-country running, which was his true passion, down to his core. As a former athlete, I can totally understand where he's coming from. Sports, especially at a higher level, and especially if you are in school and getting paid to go to school because of your sports, it really does absolutely take over your world. I would have done anything. I played college soccer. I would have done anything to remain in academic standing so I can play that game on that Saturday. And this was the same for Chris. So there was absolutely nothing that would stand in his way that would prevent him from running or losing his scholarship. Or so he thought.
Are you interested in the
unknown,
unsolved,
unseen?
Then join us.
I'm Frank.
And I'm Sage.
Every Monday as we look into the world's most perplexing mysteries.
From the Yeti of the Himalayas
to the UFO crash in Roswell.
To the haunted halls of Eastern State Penitentiary.
Or exploring the kidnappings of the Beaumont children.
We have something special for everyone.
Find Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember
to look for
the unknown,
the unsolved,
and the unseen.
So let's go to the fall of 1984. So imagine, you enrolled at a college in upstate New York. You're in your second year of college, so you're a little more confident, right? You're a sophomore now, you're not a freshman anymore, and you know your way around campus. You're excited for your academic year to start. You start seeing old friends from last year across the yard. You notice the leaves have started to change. They're bright orange and yellow color, and the cold breeze passes through your hair. This is Chris. He finds his dormitory assignment and makes his way to Erie Hall room C2D1. Little did Chris know, this room and his actions in the near future will shape the rest of his life. Chris moved onto campus alone. His father initially came to campus with him to help him move in, kind of like, I don't know about you, but like I had family come and help me move in as well. But Chris quickly noticed that he was the only student that had his dad helping him, which is like bizarre and weird to me. I don't know if that's like a thing for like SUNY Geneseo, like maybe you're too cool. But embarrassed, he asked his father to leave earlier. His dad agreed, and they parted ways. Chris spent the rest of the day unpacking, hanging posters, and making the dorm room that fit him and his personality. Do you remember decorating your dorm room? Like, I remember it was just like so much fun. Like you have like your room at home, like not in college, like in your childhood home, and you can decorate it like a lot, right? But there's only like so much you can also do. So you're in your dorm room and you can like do whatever you want, and you're decorating it and you're showing your personality to your friends and your roommates. That was a fun time. Shortly after, his roommate Paul started to move in as well. They noticed having 2 beds on the floor limited the amount of walking and working space they had on the ground. So like the standard dormitory where the 2 beds are on the floor, there's not much like partying space, walking space. So shortly after moving in, Chris and Paul decided to create a quote unquote like bunk of sort with their beds. Initially it was in their minds, but they made it a reality. They lifted their beds onto the walls to like make the bed a bunk, but without like a bottom bunk. So they were both like the top bunk. So they started drilling and screwing holes into the walls to fasten their beds to the walls about 4 to 5 feet up, which then created immense space for walking, games, and fun. They even brought a couch into the dormitory, and it like quickly became a really cool hangout space. Room C2D1 inevitably became the party room. The atmosphere was lively and exciting for now. As days passed, Chris started attending his new classes for the semester and started taking long runs out into the forest. This would happen very frequently as Chris was on the cross-country team and training was a daily occurrence. Chris admitted that he would take, quote-unquote, off the beaten path trails in the woods to get more miles, which to me is totally normal because I'm a runner. I trained for a half marathon. Getting miles in a long run is very, very hard, especially if you don't want to end up doing like 25 laps around the campus, It is hard to find continuous trails that have mileage upon mileage upon mileage. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Chris was out in the woods, like getting miles in. There's only so much sidewalk, trust me. When you start training for something like that, you like start to realize how screwed you are when it comes to things like that. So everything for Chris in college right now seemed to be going well until one night. Chris was in his room one night. He was trying to fall asleep on his bunk in the dark, but he heard his name. His name sounded disembodied and distorted, not something like he's heard before. He investigated his dark room and found nothing. His roommate Paul was fast asleep. Eventually, Chris started to become haunted by hearing his name being spoken in a disembodied form, causing great anxiety and panic when it occurred, which I can't imagine. Can you imagine having like your name be whispered like in the dead of night and you're waking up like disoriented as hell. And it's like this Chris, like this creepy, disembodied, like I can't imagine. I mean, I could slightly imagine because I do have a ghost story that I haven't told you guys yet. But it was basically, I had a name. I'll say like the whole story for another time. But basically, I did have my own name whispered very clear as day, sharp, inches away from my ear when I was completely alone. And that, I cannot describe how haunting and how frightening that was. Like it felt like I felt like the breath of Haley, like on me. That's how close. I just can't. So having this occur, for Chris, this was occurring very, very frequently. I could not imagine how absolutely terrifying it would be, because that one time nearly sent me into a spiral. And every single time I'm alone in that room, I think of that moment as if it was yesterday. Chris was going through a lot here. Night after night, Chris would be traumatized awake or startled when he studied, until one day, when he wasn't the only one in the room that would be affected. One night, Chris and Paul were trying to fall asleep. As Paul was shutting his eyes, he was startled by an odd noise. He opened his eyes to find nothing. And I assume he wasn't like that fearful, because then he continued to try and fall asleep. You know, when we all wake up in the middle of the night and you think you hear something and you look around and there's nothing and you're like, okay, and you go back to sleep. Well, shortly after, another noise occurred, so loud that it jolted Paul. Paul, startled out of his mind, freaked out and woke up Chris. He told him to go to the bottom of their bunks to check out what the noise could have been. Chris, now completely awake, made his way down the ladder from the top bunks, flashlight in hand. As Chris searched, he reassured Paul that there was nothing down there. But as Chris was bent beneath the bunk searching, Paul met the eyes of a full-body apparition that now stood in the middle of the room, making direct eye contact with him. Insert blood-curdling scream here, literally. My twisted mind always, imagines, a full-body apparition at the end of my bed, right? Oh, I heard a noise, my eyes are closed, I'm going to wake up, and I'm going to see, somebody standing at the foot of my bed, right? But there's never somebody there, so far. Knocking on wood, I hope you can hear that. Knocking on wood. Paul met the eyes of a full-body apparition. Can you truly just sit and think about how absolutely horrifying that would be? Truly sit and let that saturate in your brain for a second. So after this incident, Paul packed his belongings and actually dropped out of college completely. He went back home with his family, and he didn't even take the time to say goodbye to his roommate or any of his friends. Chris was now alone in his haunted dorm room. He was continually tormented night and day by the paranormal. His grades were starting to slip, and he was put into academic probation. So basically what academic probation is when you are no longer able to practice or compete in your sport because your grades are slipping. So if you're getting C's or D's and your GPA falls underneath a certain standard, the school will put you on academic probation, and then you're no longer allowed to compete or participate. Which I cannot imagine how absolutely isolating that was for Chris. So now his roommate literally dropped out of college. He's alone in the dorm room where he's hearing voices and his roommate is seeing full body apparitions. His sport is his passion, his life. And now he's put on academic probation and he can't compete anymore. So he can't even hang out with his teammates outside of his dorm room. And now he's literally probably just stuck in his dorm room. After some time, he found solitude and comfort in a friend that lived down the hall, and this friend was named Jeff Ungar. So let's get to know this Jeff Ungar, since he does play a very big role in this story. So as we know, Jeff Ungar lived a few dorms down the hall from Chris. He actually dormed with another young male that completely did not believe anything was happening to Chris. He was kind of like a bully. He was like a shithead. And he would just tell Chris to man up and stuff. So he was not a great person, but Jeff, his roommate, was pretty cool. Jeff had always been extremely interested in the paranormal and what could happen after death. And this was due to an experience that Jeff had when he was a lot younger. So when Jeff was 15 years old, he worked as a newspaper boy. He would deliver local newspapers to homes in the surrounding area. One day, he stumbled across a running car on his paper route. The car door was ajar. Intrigued, he investigated further. This is when Jeff stumbled upon a man in the car on the verge of death. Jeff explained in the Netflix documentary how traumatizing of an experience this was. He was the last person this older man had seen on Earth before he passed away. Jeff also explained how he heard the quote-unquote like death rattle in this older man as he took his last breath, literally as Jeff watched and he left the earth. Watching such a horrific scene, the young mind of Jeff was now a little changed. He sought after the paranormal world thereafter and started to document all paranormal situations and experiences. When Jeff and Chris were attending college together, the infamous Ed and Lorraine Warren were expected to present at Geneseo, which, can we talk about this real quick in a side tangent? This college was able to have the infamous Warrens present paranormal investigations at their college. I would have died. I would have passed away if I were given the opportunity to sit in front of Ed and Lorraine Warren and to listen to them speak. I know people who don't necessarily believe 100% the things that they did, and then there's the other end of the spectrum where people do believe. I would just simply die. I mean, can you imagine having the opportunity to do that? Like in college, like we had like some fun events, but I didn't have anything close to Ed and Lorraine Warren coming to my college. But anyways, Jeff was very excited about this presentation and eventually convinced Chris to attend with him. This was because Jeff was intrigued and eager to learn or understand the situation that Chris was currently in. Jeff and Chris arrived at Ed and Lorraine Warren's presentation. So real quick, if you don't know who Ed and Lorraine Warren are, they are the infamous paranormal investigators, demonologists, and transients. They are husband and wife, and they work together to solve problems of demonic possessions to just outright investigating the paranormal. I cover Ed and Lorraine Warren in my Annabelle episode, so be sure to check that out. I go down the rabbit hole of Annabelle, so it's a good one to listen to. While at the presentation, Jeff took extensive notes during the Warrens' presentation. He took notes on spirit communication, the use and fear of Ouija boards, tips on how to capture the paranormal as evidence. The Warrens also covered the importance of protecting yourself from opening unwanted paranormal portals. Unlike Jeff, Chris just sat there, as if in a daze the entire time the Warrens presented. During this moment, Chris may have been locking all the pieces together and realizing that he may just be under some sort of spell or possession, because before, he really just thought he was going insane, especially after hearing all those disembodied voices. After the presentation concluded, students were then allowed to go up on stage and meet the Warrens, which again, I would die. Oh my God. Could you imagine? Could you imagine truly just being like I fangirl over the fact that my mom and my aunt know somebody, or knew somebody in high school that the Warrens then did an investigation on. I fangirl over that. Could you imagine walking on stage and actually seeing them? Jeff was actually excited to meet the Warrens because he thought he was going to be able to actually have a conversation with them about Chris and this situation that they were having or trying to investigate or deal with. But unfortunately, the two of them had a different interaction with the Warrens than expected. So as Chris made his way onto stage, he started to introduce himself to Lorraine Warren by lending out a hand for a handshake. She stared at Chris for a moment and refused to shake his hand. She quickly left the stage thereafter. Watching the Netflix documentary, it kind of made it seem like she was extremely uncomfortable and kind of shocked when she saw Chris. So everybody was going up there, meeting her, saying hi. Jeff was up there saying hi. And as soon as Chris went out to lend his hand to Lorraine to say hello and introduce himself, she quickly, you can see she turned off. And something about Chris coming up to her was an absolute no-go. And she refused to shake his freaking hand and left the stage immediately afterwards. So I'm theorizing that maybe she felt the possession, maybe she saw the energy or the entity next to Chris and didn't want anything to do with it. It had to be something like that. So that had happened to Chris, and that only made Chris feel if you think about it from the other perspective, how embarrassing and traumatizing would that have been to go up to somebody, shake their hand, and they just refuse in front of everybody. I mean, that in itself is very isolating and sad. So this probably just made Chris feel even more insane, even more isolated, and even more alone. So about 11 days after the presentation, the paranormal experiences Chris was having were escalating to even worse. He was disturbed while he tried to study, sleep, or even just relax in his room. The entity would call his name, Chris, in a distant, ghoulish, mocking tone. Day after day, the voices got louder and closer, until one day Chris started to feel like he was going insane. He thought at some point he was going to have a mental break. His grades were slipping even worse, he was still on academic probation, and he wasn't allowed to run anymore. To Chris, it felt like everything he had worked so hard for was literally slipping away because of an entity that he could not prove and he could not see. Chris stated, quote, "I thought I was losing my mind. I couldn't tell if what I was seeing or hearing was true. I did not know if this was reality or if I'm just caught in this never-ending nightmare." Quote. As days progressed, Chris eventually found himself standing in front of a full-body apparition of the disembodied voice he had been hearing before. And this changed everything. After the entity presented itself to Chris, he immediately went to Jeff. One day, while the boys were talking, they were discussing how they wanted to create a code name for the ghost. And this was because Chris was already being bullied at school for being the ghost boy. People would see him and call him ghost boy because rumors and, people were talking, it was all starting to leak out. So people were calling him ghost boy and not respecting the fact that he was actually being traumatized. And the last thing that Chris wanted people to know was him and Jeff continuously talking about this experience or experiences and overhearing him by accident, especially because they started getting into deep investigations and stuff. So one afternoon, Jeff asked what the name of the entity should be, and Chris said Tommy. Intrigued as always, and with the knowledge from Ed and Lorraine Warren, Jeff was on the mission to capture this entity, or Tommy, with evidence. He also wanted to do this to give some relief to Chris and acknowledge him that he wasn't going insane, and that he was being tormented by something unseen. So one night, Chris and Jeff performed a calling ritual to the entity. During this session, Chris's closet door in his dormitory did open, and a cold draft swelled into the room. Chris stood there motionless, filled with fright, and this was when Jeff took a picture. A moment perfect on camera. But Jeff captured nothing. At some point in their investigation, Chris moved to his bed, and eventually he felt weightless, as if he was hovering over his bed. He was very much still grounded to the bed, but with this change in environment, Jeff snapped a picture of this time, and he caught something worth noting. You can actually look this up, but if you look at the picture, you can see Chris and some sort of misty, see-through white mist right next to him. But if you actually look at this mist, there are parts of this misty, wispy cloud right next to Chris that actually creates an image of a skeleton. You can see bones, you can see where the rib cage would be, you can see where the hip bones are, you can see the collarbone. It makes a fucking skeleton. It's spooky. Look it up. Chris wasn't the only person who experienced absolutely horrifying experiences. It was like this entity started to creep down the halls into the other dormitories, a few doors down from Chris. One night, a young woman went back to her dorm room alone. She was changing in her room, presumably getting ready for bed. She was standing in front of her full-body mirror when over her shoulder she saw the entity, dark, tall, and standing behind her, followed by an eerie call to Chris. She screamed, and Jeff and Chris came running to her room. They found her on the floor, almost unresponsive. Another young female experienced something horrifying too. She was held down onto her bed by an unseen force. Jeff actually took a photo of this encounter, and there's just pure terror across this girl's face. Also, Netflix interviewed this young female that was held down onto the bed, and they were asking her to they were interviewing her. So they were please describe the experience. What was it like? What did you experience? Things like that. And she started to explain the situation and the story. She's an older woman now, so they all look a lot different, but she got to the point where she literally couldn't speak, and her breathing was intensifying, and she started crying really hard, and the interview actually had to stop, and we couldn't continue or hear what was happening next or how she actually felt or things like that into detail, because she physically couldn't continue the interview because of how horrifying the experience was when she was a young teen, or young adult rather. And she clearly is experiencing some sort of really extreme PTSD from that moment as well. So that to me was extremely telling on the documentary. Why is this entity going further down the hallway? Is it getting more and more angry? Why is it starting to attack others? Is it trying to tell Chris a message, but he's not getting it? And where did this haunting come from? So let's go to March 13th, 1985. So we're in the spring semester now. And on this day, things turned physically between the entity and Chris. Chris was showering in the shared bathrooms at college where he was physically assaulted. He dropped to the ground after being cut on his back, leaving 3 deep wounds. He was alone, scared, and laid on the bathroom floor until Jeff came by and discovered him. So things in 3 are important, and they're important. Well, I know, listen, I'm going to talk about Zach Bagans. There is a whole population that I'm slowly learning that does not like Zach Bagans. Well, I love Zach Bagans. So if you're not on that train, I'm sorry that we're not on the same train, but we can still love the same things and different people, right? So I like Zach Bagans. I've been watching Ghost Adventures since forever, since I was in middle school, for years and years and years and years. And what Zach Bagans explains a lot is the importance of things in 3. So knocking in 3, scratches in 3. It could be the mark of something very dark, right? It also is a way of mocking the Holy Trinity. That's what Zach says a lot. So the fact that Chris was scratched with 3 deep wounds usually tells us that this is very dark, this is very evil, and it's definitely powerful enough to make itself known. Chris felt like he had nowhere to turn after this incident. His and Jeff's investigations were not yielding any sort of results, and things just kept getting worse and worse. If the entity can leave 3 deep wounds on Chris's back, what else is it capable of? In April of 1985, Chris turned to the church for answers and asked for a local priest for help. It took the priest some convincing to believe Chris and about his potential attachment. This priest did explain on the documentary how he did not believe in spirits or ghosts, so it was really hard for him to actually believe Chris, in which I say, how the hell are you a priest that doesn't believe in spirits or ghosts? I don't get it. You pray to the Holy Spirit, believe that Jesus rose from the dead. There are good things and bad things and spirits and guardian angels and spirit guides. How are you a priest and you don't believe in spirits or a ghost? I don't really understand that one, but this is what this priest claims. So he didn't believe in anything. So he was having a really hard time understanding why Chris was so disheveled. But ultimately, the priest came back to Chris's room and blessed the dorm room with holy water and read a passage from a book entitled Pastoral Care for the Sick. So still, it's making me feel like he didn't necessarily believe Chris in the possession, and he was just reading a book on the mentally ill to Chris or something, But during the blessing, the priest later admitted that he did have an experience of his own. And he did keep it to himself because he did not want to make Chris fear his living situation even more, which I respect very much. But on the documentary, the priest did admit that he did feel a presence in the room, especially while he was blessing the room. He felt he did express that the room felt abnormal, and he did say that there was something else in the room, but he could not determine what. The priest later left without incident. The blessing did help for a little bit, but Chris admitted that whatever was in the room or attached to him was definitely not gone. He turned to his last resort, which was his father, for comfort. His father, a man of fact, had a hard time understanding what Chris was going through, and he just chalked it up to just college stress. Chris was so persistent that his father ended up quite worried and drove all the way to college and stayed the night with Chris. That following morning, the two of them went on a long run. This is something that they used to bond over a lot. So Chris actually started cross-country running because of his father being a long-distance runner too. And Chris's dad thought it might bring some relief to his son as well. So Chris took his father out on the usual long run he would perform around school, back in the woods. When they were running out in the woods, Chris's father stumbled upon a memorial hidden beneath the leaves. This memorial was for Sergeant Parker Boyd. While the two were out running, Jeff was actually in the library reading. He did this a lot because he was still very determined to figure out what the hell was going on with Chris. So he was in the library, he was taking out books, he was researching the school, like were there any hauntings in the school, were there any deaths on the school, like on the school property? Was there anything going on in the nearby areas that might help him reveal what's happening to Chris? He was very deeply involved. And after connecting more and more dots, and after Chris explained to Jeff that him and his father found a memorial out in the woods, the story finally started to come together. The root cause to all the paranormal happenings had revealed itself. So listen to this. The memorial that Chris and his father had found was for Sergeant Parker Boyd. This sergeant was actually murdered and tortured in the most inhumane way during the Revolutionary War. And the memorial marked the place in which this torture occurred. So trigger warning here. If you don't want to hear about really disturbing deaths, skip forward a little bit. But Sergeant Parker Boyd was tied and tortured on the tree that was where the memorial was. He was mutilated to death as his organs were cut out and tied around the tree, and his ears were ripped off, and he was left there to die. Chris had been running past this memorial and the tree where this horrific event had occurred for weeks and weeks without knowing. Chris may have gained his attachment to this entity from just his pure presence over and over again at the same site when he was going on his long runs. It is believed that Boyd was attaching or reaching out to Chris, haunting him and bringing Chris to his greatest fear as he was moments before he passed. And to put the cherry on top of all of this, it was later learned that Chris's father had found accounts that his wife, so Chris's mom, was actually ancestors to the people who ended up finding the mutilated and tortured body of Boyd. You can't come more full circle than that. That is insane. When I found this out, I was like losing my mind. So was Boyd haunting the family line because they were like the first to discover his body? Like Chris's ancestors were the first to discover the body. So was he kind of feeling this attachment to him? Was it fate that Chris attended this college, got a running scholarship, and inevitably just continued to run past the memorial over and over and over again because he was tied to it somehow because his ancestors found the body of Boyd years and years ago? If you start thinking about it and going down the rabbit hole, it is unbelievable. So where is Chris now? Chris has carried his experience over many, many years. Quote, "The last 40 years of my life have been in large part shaped by that time in Erie Hall." Quote. He has published many memoirs and novels about his time in Erie Hall, and now has recently participated in the Netflix documentary, which I highly, highly recommend. They do like reenactments and stuff, so they actually have Chris and Jeff is on there. They do the live interviews there. They show the pictures from where Jeff took. You can see the skeleton picture on there. You can see the interviews with the priest, the interviews with the young woman who was having a really hard time expressing how she was feeling during that time. And while they do these interviews, they have like those reenactments of actors portraying it. And it's actually kind of spooky. Like it wasn't just like those silly, they have like those silly reenactments of like scary things and they're not that scary. This was actually pretty scary. Like I had to turn it off at some point because I got spooked so badly. So just be aware of that, but it is a really, really good story. So please go watch it. It's definitely worth the watch. And again, if you have any hauntings yourself, please send your stories to moonbrewspodcast@gmail.com. And also, sage yourself. I have my Go Away Evil spray that I'm going to have spray myself here, light your candles, say your prayers, say good things out into the universe, protect yourself.